How is infrared thermography used in PV system O&M? Well, it may be the single most important tool that we have, as it can be used on all electrical equipment and allows us to identify a broad range of issues. Brian, can you tell us a little bit more?
NFPA 70B calls out thermography as an annual requirement for most electrical equipment. We can perform thermography on a range of equipment like transformers, switchgear, terminations, overcurrent protection devices, breakers, fuses, module plug connectors. And we can see signs of overheating. Sometimes we can see it with our visible eye, where metal is discolored or plastic or wire insulation is damaged. And other times, well, if we haven't performed thermography, maybe those loose terminations and extra resistance lead to other results that we can see with our naked eye, like equipment that's burned up or melted down. So what about the glass? All of the PV modules that are part of our system that make up the vast majority of the physical part of the system and can cover acres and acres and acres in large systems. Well, thermal imaging can be used to identify a lot of different problems with PV modules themselves. Often, what we'll see is it doesn't identify the root cause. It's really good at saying, hey, there's a problem over here, and it might even be one or two of these three things, but you're probably still going to have to go find exactly where that problem is or what the actual cause of the problem is. So it locates potential problems. And we'll also see that sometimes it makes non-existent problems look like they're actually a bigger issue than they really are. So I kind of like to break this down into two different categories. We have handheld thermography and we have aerial thermography. Handheld thermography, we can look at different types of equipment, like I mentioned earlier, terminations. We also might use it for troubleshooting, where we're trying to track down an actual problem and we're on site with the camera in hand. Aerial thermography is what we use to look at PV modules. This could be performed in-house. It may be something that you contract out to a third-party provider, and it's either going to be performed using drones or, in some cases, fixed-winged manned aircraft. Both of these are probably going to be components of a PV O&M program. We're going to be looking at electrical equipment, typically using handheld thermography, and then we may apply aerial thermography to look at modules to identify problems that would be much more time-consuming to track down, to locate, doing testing on the ground. We might have an indication there's a problem. Maybe a system's underperforming. Aerial thermography could quickly direct us to where the actual issues are and then allow us to troubleshoot further from there. Or maybe your system has granular enough monitoring that you can figure it out without going to aerial thermography. But it is an efficient way to look at a lot of modules, find problems, do it quickly, and do it relatively safely. The image here on the slide, you can see a couple of different things going on. That top left module string there, obviously it's warmer than all the other ones. And then the one to the right of it has some kind of patchwork where you can kind of see a bunch of different colorations. And then I see a couple other hot spots localized on a few individual modules as well. So diving into some of those things we can see with the thermal camera, we can see hot cells on individual modules. We can see strings and sections of modules that are offline. In that image on the bottom left there, you can see several strings of modules that are all hotter than everything else. Modules that are not operating appear hotter than the modules around them. You can also see a couple of smaller, narrower subsections of modules that are hotter, and those are not operating as well. In fact, there we have bypass diodes conducting, which may be because there's an issue with the module, or it may be because a bypass diode's doing its job. And what is that? Yeah, it's to route current around parts of modules that are shaded, soiled, or perhaps damaged to prevent overheating them. So we can clearly see those individual sections, usually 1/3 of a module, that's not operating. We can see that patchwork pattern we saw in the previous slide. This is characteristic of a short-circuited string of modules where we have a looping current in there and all of the cells are kind of lighting up at different levels based on how much of that current they can or cannot pass in that short circuit. And then drilling down further, I talked about those bypass diodes that we could see thirds of a module or sections of a module not conducting. Here you can actually see the bypass diode in the junction box on the back of the module itself, warming up and giving off heat because it is passing current through it instead of that third of the module that's being bypassed.
Click subscribe to stay up to date on codes, standards, and electro tech.